Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here and to be at the part of this Lowell Gray seminar series. I think this is actually a really, really important time in the history of our country and actually of our species, because the next 5 to 10 years is going to be critical. It is going to decide where we as a civilization will go. And you are going to be graduating soon, maybe this year or maybe next few years, into this world, which is why I named this particular talk, You Are the Transition Generation, because the hardest part will not be where things are today or the one where we're going in about 10 to 15 years. Is this transition period, this middle period, where you guys will actually go in and start to both enjoy some of the benefits, but also maybe suffer some of the difficulties and challenges of this transition. And you are going to be inheriting a very different world than the one that your parents grew up in, right? So the key that I want to leave for you guys before I start is to understand that you still have an opportunity to change the future that you will be inheriting, and you actually have a responsibility to do that. So before I begin, let me do a raise of hands. How many people have used AI in the last week to do anything? Raise your hand, okay. And then how many have used it to make photos or music? Okay, a few less, okay. How many have used deep research so that you have it run for half an hour and really understand a particular topic? Okay, a few folks. And then how many have used it to do coding or make agents at their home, personal agents? Okay, actually a few more than I expected. All right, how many of you have gotten help from your teachers to do any of those things? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Okay, so this is part of the issue, is that this is one of the most transformative technologies in our history, and in some ways, you probably know a lot more about these things than some of your teachers do, right? And so there's going to be a little bit of a disparity both in terms of opinions on this technology and also knowledge about it. So there might be some things that you can actually teach your teachers. Now, when I said transition, we're looking at a transition between what utopian worlds and a potentially disastrous future if we don't get this right the next few years, okay? And when people think about utopia and dystopia, they think about, actually, before I go to that, we're in this period where we're at the top of this knife's edge on a mountain. And whichever side we go on, it's going to stay there for a very long time. This is why I said the next 5 years is so critical, because if we make the right decisions from a policy perspective, from an education perspective, from how are we going to be building this technology, we could end up on that good side and it'll stay there for a very long time because the momentum of that technology will keep us there. But if we make the wrong decisions and make it into a weapon or a reason for us to dominate over others, we're going to head down a very dark and slippery slope. And when people think of the future, they think this is the utopia future. We sit around, we watch movies all day. That's really not the future I'm talking about. And then the other group of people say, oh, it's going to be really bad. AI is going to kill us all. We're going to be batteries. And I think neither of these are actually the likely futures that are coming. I'll tell you at the end which ones I think are more likely. And recently, last few years, people talk about Gen AI, and they think that's all of AI, as the announcer was mentioning. I've been working on it for 35 years. People actually have been doing this for probably 50 to 60 years. So it is actually, the AI itself is a very old concept. In fact, Gen AI is just part of tool AI. Right? And I've spent my time doing good old-fashioned AI, narrow AI. Now things are agentic AI, where it actually helps you do things, not just gives you information. Soon we're going to have countries create sovereign AI, and then at some point we'll get to AGI or ASI, which is AI that can essentially learn by itself and do most of the work that are out there. Okay? And ASI is kind of much, much more powerful. Now, why do I think we're going to get there? Because if you look over the last 5 years, essentially every single benchmark we've given to AI, it's able to solve and it's able to exceed human-level capabilities. And it's doing it faster and faster. In fact, now, rather than just passing benchmarks, it's able to do work that was equivalent to human work. It used to be a few minutes and then an hour. And within the last year, we've gone up from an hour to about 14, 15 hours of work. So essentially, you can give it a task, and they will come back with a relatively finished good that would have taken a professional a day or two, and in some cases, actually months, right? People are using these tools today to make a compiler, which would take hundreds of man-hours or sometimes man-years to do, or a browser, or, it's amazing how much is capable if you design the right set of instructions. So this technology has huge promise. Right? If done right, it can help increase understanding, make us super productive, give us, solve energy and climate issues, make us healthier, find cures for aging. Essentially, everything that we've been talking about in sci-fi is going to be potentially possible. Now, the real question is, do we use that technology to create a world of abundance, or is it going to be something that will create global dominance for a special or small group of people? Now, we've been building a lot of data centers. I'm sure you've heard about that. And that's where a lot of money is going, particularly in the US. We've gone from ones that were the last one, which was about probably 100,000 chips, to now these things that are about 1 million to 2 million chips. And they're costing tens to hundreds of billions of dollars. And then you have Elon Musk, who now wants to make something that's 10 times bigger than that bigger one that we just saw. Right? So we're talking about trillions of dollars that are going to be spent. Even this year, it's going to be 700 billion in the US alone. Right? And why are we doing this? Because there's something called the scaling law that was talked about 7, 8 years ago. And the idea is that the more chips you put in, the bigger the models, the more data you put in, the smarter it gets. And that's been true. But when it grows logarithmically, which means you go 10x the power of compute and data, you might get a 2x increase in performance. What's happening over the last couple years, is actually what I call descaling laws, where you let it run longer, you give it new techniques, you distill it from large to smaller models, you make the parameters from 64 bits to 4-bit or 1-bit, right? And you give it tools, things that we've been using and creating as a society for ourselves for a very long time. And when you do that, you can get actually exponential changes. One line of code might give you a 2x or a 5x increase in reduction in loss, whereas it might take billions of dollars on the other side. Okay? And that changes everything. That allows very capable models to run on your desk on Mac Minis or Sparks or even on your phone. I have one on my phone that is running without internet that's as good as GPT-4 was just a year ago. Right? That's the kind of optimizations that we're getting, which is why, does it really make sense for us to be spending trillions of dollars on data centers when these things are getting better and better and smaller? And not everybody needs to have data center quality leading edge capabilities. Most of what you do probably on a daily basis, whether it's writing or summarizing emails or looking at news, those things can be done with the one that would have ran on my phone and essentially cost nothing and no energy burn, right? That's something that's a real problem. And why are we doing this? Because we have this fictional race that's going on. There's just this AI race, and in the depiction is we have America's running unencumbered at the leading part of the race, and then we have China who's building infrastructure and more energy, and it's running a little behind, and then we have the lowly turtle, who is a little bit behind, but they've got a social safety net, protecting the privacy and safety and jobs of their countrymen, right? And the idea is whoever gets to this finish line wins, right? That's in fact a problem, because it's not a finish line that we're getting to. We're getting to a disruptive change in our economy and our civilization, because when AGI comes, and it will come, it essentially replaces all cognitive labor. That means the jobs that you guys were planning to graduate into are either not going to be created, or actually some of them will be removed from the job force, right? But then, some people will say, oh, but then, this is only affects America, the rest of the world is okay because they have better social safety nets and so forth. The reality is actually a little bit more complicated, because every major country and region in the world is tied together because we have, unified communication systems and financial systems and trade systems and political systems. And so if any one of these major players goes down, everybody gets dragged down, right? And this is where we're headed to, because America is spending trillions of dollars to build this infrastructure. They are going to put a lot of risk into where the economy is going, and people talk about this AI bubble. And yes, there is an AI bubble, and yes, there will be a correction. And when that correction happens, it will affect jobs, and it will affect the economy, and it will affect how countries and leaders react, right? I normally spend a lot of time talking to policymakers and government folks and Fortune 500 leaders. So it's a little different audience than you. But so I've actually created stuff that are more, I think, in line with how you might be able to appreciate this stuff. Right? But you look at what we're doing today is that we're racing down the hill that we don't know what's ahead of us, right? Because we have this fictional race. The only issue is now we took the brakes off, right? If you were a skilled mountain bike rider, you probably could still maneuver through this. But once you take the brakes off, which is what's happening today, nobody will be able to maneuver through what's coming because we don't know what's ahead. Right? And that's the big problem. And there's major risks that are associated with this technology. We talked about the job risk. There will be job displacement, and when jobs are lost, people are going to lose purpose. They're going to have mental health issues. And that's a societal issue that corporate leaders need to deal with. We are also going to have bad actors. And I spent a number of years in the cybersecurity world. And the first people to use new technologies are hackers and terrorists and folks that want to take advantage of a technology before other people find a defense for it. So whether cyber attacks or using it, or platform providers, major social networks that would use it to manipulate you. And CBRNE is chemical, bio, radio, nuclear, or explosive. So it's more the terrorist side of the misuse. And then we're going to have governmental misuse, right? In the sense of militarizing it and escalating it and creating tensions between countries, which we are seeing right now on the daily news, right? And of course, lastly, we talked about this misalignment risk. When people talk about AI safety, they talk about runaway AI, the robots are coming, they're going to turn us into slaves or whatever, right? Now, there's a small chance of that, but you know what? There's a 100% chance that the three in blue are going to happen because they're already happening today. And we need to make sure that we spend more focus on controlling what those risks are, and we actually have an ability to control them because those are decisions that we make, because those are things that people can control. What ultimately happens with AI in terms of whether or not it wants to take over the world, which there is no research that shows that smarter AI actually is more malevolent. There is no research that shows that. But there is a lot of people writing stories about it, and it attracts attention, which actually takes away the attention that's needed to solve the problems underneath. Right? Now, going back to the jobs question, which I'm sure a lot of you are very concerned about, is we've been promised that, hey, the more education you get, the better jobs you get, the higher the pays are, and traditionally it's been true. But the part that will be most impacted by AI is actually the higher education. The more education you have, the more exposed you will be to AI job displacement, because the more cognitive factor is of your labor that you're providing. And those are things that AI will do better than most humans, as we saw from the chart earlier in the presentation. Right? So if you look at what's happened over the last few years, in the past, you go back 20, 10 years, every time the stock market goes up, job postings go up. Right? When it comes down, job postings come down. Well, 3 years ago, there was a divergence. The stock market kept going up, and job postings kept going down. That's a bad sign. Right? That means that something has changed fundamentally in terms of how labor is working, and that is when ChatGPT was released. In fact, where I'm working right now at Stanford, we recently came out with a paper called The Canary in the Coal Mine, and it talks about also around 2022, is when there was a divergence between, in the past, essentially, whether or not you're a junior worker or a senior person, you all kept going up with the economy. And what's happening is that the more junior you are, the more impacted the job loss is, right? Or the lack of new offerings. For junior workers, they've gone down almost 20% from where they were just 3 years ago. Okay? And you can see that even for mid-tier workers, they're starting to show impact. So it's not keeping up with the growth of the other jobs. And that's a real issue. In fact, just last week, I just came out with a new paper about enterprise. It's called Enterprise AI Playbook. We went and interviewed 50 different companies about what they're doing with AI. And this is what we found, is that the less you have humans in the loop, the higher the productivity gains that you will get. Okay? Now, I'm not saying everything should be automated, but if you find things that are repetitive and things that are reversible, when you make it agentic and you make it a high automation, you're going to get better returns. Now, the scary part was this part, is when I went and asked those same leaders, now what are you going to do with all this productivity gain? 45% said, I'm going to lay people off, reduction. 19% said, I'm going to stop hiring. So together, that's about 2/3 of the total companies and workforce that is impacted with today's technology. And the companies that we talk to have implemented this over the last 1 or 2 years. So these are relatively older versions of AI that's available. Just imagine what's possible today if you know what's been improving or the rate of improvement you've seen. And the countries that are most exposed to this are America, Europe, Western Europe, and East Asia, where the cognitive labor force is somewhere between 60 to 65%, right? So we are running the fastest, we are the most in danger, and we have zero social safety net. It's not a good combination. And we have the most guns per capita anywhere in the world. That group of combination of facts makes America a very dangerous place to be in. And how do we get through this transition? That's why I really want to focus on that. And you look at as an example, we can look at the transition of horses to automobiles back in 1900. So when the cars first came out, essentially all transportation was horses. And it took about 30 years for that to transfer out. But if you look at New York, where it was the epitome of high technology at the time, you had essentially 1900, you had one automobile and all horse and carriage. And just 13 years later, it was all automobiles and one horse and carriage. So that transition didn't take 30 years, it took 13 years to go to essentially 100%. And I think we're going to see that same issue here, is that in places like America, where the technology is more advanced, it will transition. And right now there's kind of a question of when does this technology come? When is it able? And I will tell you that the technology that is available even today can replace probably somewhere between 60 to 70% of white-collar labor today. And that's going to be changing and getting better over just the next 1 or 2 years, right? So I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, because what I also found from my research was that the biggest issues was not technology, what was keeping people from doing the proper deployments. It was all organizational issues. But organizational issues can be learned. How do you manage? How do you incentivize? How do you create the design the workflow? Those things, once it's honed, it can be deployed very quickly and learned between organizations. So this is where I understand there's a lot of probably angst and anxiety amongst the young people today of what happens when you graduate. Will there be jobs? What jobs would make sense for you? And we've been trained that occupation is kind of the focus. It's all about career growth, right? And if you look back and you say, what does the word occupation mean? It actually comes from the word occupatio, which is Latin for to occupy. And what are you occupying? You're occupying time. You're essentially trading time for money. Okay, that's a form of, essentially, it's wage labor, and some people say it's maybe wage slavery, just a transfer from being forced to do something to now being forced by using a different incentive system. Whereas people used to right now talk about vocation and say, oh, that's blue collar work, that's kind of lowly. But if you go back and you look at what vocation actually comes from, it comes from the word vocatio, which is your calling. It's your calling by God to do something amazing that is suitable for you. Right? So in fact, where we should probably start to do is to move things. Now, I'm not saying everybody should go do blue-collar work, but vocation doesn't have to mean blue-collar. In fact, up to probably 200 or 300 years ago, the concept of jobs actually didn't exist. People just worked as an apprentice to a certain master, and they honed their craft and their skill their entire career. Okay? And in fact, actually, I'm going to ask a piece of data, that trivia that I think will surprise some of you. At what year in the world did wage labor become the primary population of global workforce? Wage labor, being paid for your time. Anybody know? This is across the world, not just in America. Any guesses? 2015. Okay, 2015 was the year, if you look at the global labor statistics data, 2015 was when 50% of the global workforce was being paid a wage instead of being a farmer or working for themselves or working in small business, etc. Okay? So this is actually a new concept. And if you can look and find your passion and add it with AI, whatever you do, you can actually have a lot more control over your future. In fact, I'll give you an example. My daughter was with Microsoft. She was a PM there. She actually quit her job last year because she was so stressed by the constant burden of layoffs that she quit and she opened a coffee shop called Offline Coffee. And they're focused on getting people to get disconnected because she wants some control over her life and her own career. Right? So I'm not recommending that for everyone, but here's something that I think Picasso said that actually is very interesting that might answer some of your questions. And both my parents were artists, so I have a particular passion for artists. And he said something that is very meaningful. He said, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and then the purpose of life is to give it away. He didn't say the meaning of life is to find your gift and then sell it for as much as you can and get on the cover of Fortune magazine. Right? Give it away. Because that's really, I think, what everybody's purpose is to find what it is that you can make the most contribution to this world is. I know a lot of people today are very focused on becoming the billionaire, the next Elon Musk or the next Zuckerberg. But I want to give you a little piece of good news. The good news is everybody's already a billionaire. You're a billionaire in time. Your entire life, on average, will be about 2 billion seconds. You get to choose how you decide to use that time. And every one of you will at least be that because you're probably healthier than the average person around the world, right? And so when you have that, now you need to start thinking about what are you going to do with your time? Here's some recommendations. Find your purpose, find your calling that you want to devote your time to. Take time to really ask deeper questions and think critically, think systematically. That's really what's going to differentiate you in this future workforce when answers become very cheap. Build soft skills. I know a lot of people talk about STEM, and I spent my entire career in tech and STEM, but soft skills is going to be a matter a lot more going forward than knowing how to do a math formula or to program something. Psychology, philosophy, communication, storytelling, history, ethics. How to be a better person. Rather than being a 10x engineer or a 10x trader, be a 10x human, right? Invest in reading more books, because books is the most condensed form of understanding what somebody spent an entire life doing. They put into a book. You could read it in a few hours, right? Think about this as AI trained on trillions of tokens that would take us tens of thousands of years to consume. You should be doing that with the most efficient way. And actually, books and going deep is going to be a lot more efficient than looking at 10-second TikToks. Okay? Spend time honing your AI proficiency, but also your world understanding politics, understanding economics, understanding cultures. Okay? And reduce time on TV, on social networks, on games. At the same time, do make time for sports, fitness, and sleep, because if you're not healthy, you can't do any of this. And spend time traveling. Spend time seeing other parts of the world. Learn a new language, because when you do that, you will take and get a perspective that you did not get. Too many Americans spend time in America and don't leave this country. And even when they leave, they spend a lot of time at 5-star resort hotels that looks the same no matter what country you go to. That doesn't really help you. And reserve time for your family. Put down your phone, talk to them, and build relationship with mentors that are going to help you throughout your life. What you'll find is that what you learn doesn't matter, but who you know matters. And when they care about you and you care about them, you will find ways to help each other through this transition period. And spend time dedicating it to helping the world, not just helping yourself, not just growing your wealth, helping it become more united, more abundant. I'm going to give you a little bit of history lesson about socioeconomic development over the last 20,000 years. It's going to go quick. We started as hunter-gatherers, and that was the majority of our history. Right? We moved with our food. There was only about 5 or 10 million humans on this planet, and it was relatively abundant. And and then we moved into pastoral, and we herded, and we started to have agriculture. We started to have commerce and machines, and at every time, our productivity got bigger and bigger, and our scale of influence got bigger and bigger. Now we're at a point where we are very close to getting an AGI that can do most of our work and robots that will do most of the manual labor. And when you put that together, it frees us up, right? In the past, every period had its own constrained resource. Initially, it was just time, because we didn't have a lot of other things. We just had time on our hands, and what did we do with it? And then it was about how much livestock, and how much land, and how much labor, and how much machines, and how much money. And now we are potentially getting to a point where, again, time is actually the only constraint. Because if you have machines that can build everything, and they can do it all by itself, you don't really need as much money as you thought you did, and it doesn't really help you anymore. Now it's about how do you spend that time? What do you do with it? Where do you focus? And people are going to say, okay, well, this sounds a lot like we're going back to a more, primitive space when time was the most constrained. And in fact, at each one of these periods, there was a different economic and social political model where it was much more egalitarian. If you look at primitive tribes today, even the ones that are here today, there's not a lot of hierarchy. And the chief of a tribe lives in the same hut, eats the same food, does the same work as everybody else. That's not the case in developed societies like we're living in, like this city. And then we move into more of a slave and feudalistic society where people own the land or own the space, and then they control their folks. And then we got into where capital became the key. The more money you have, the more machines you have, and that allows you to make more profits, and the focus is about maximizing profitability. And then socialism came in as a response to it because the labor was being a little bit, taken advantage of. And now we have an opportunity to get somewhere I call abundantism. If you go on Substack and look for abundantism, I wrote an essay specifically about where things are going. I don't think we have time to go through the details, but I urge you to do that, okay? And people are going to say, Alvin, egalitarianism, that's not really human nature. For 95% of our humans' existence, we lived in an egalitarian world, right? In fact, the key is, if you look at this picture, it makes it a lot more clear. This is human history, 250,000 years. Each one of these is 250, each block is 250 years. This was, Jesus came here, okay? And if you look, very small part of the world was it in a government and controlled world, okay? Most of the time we were in balance with nature, we were in balance with each other, and we did not war with each other, okay? I'm going to tell you a little story about two monkeys that will help explain this. How many people know about bonobos and chimps? So we have Charlie the chimpanzee and Bob the bonobo. They look very similar. They're 99.8% identical genetically with each other. They're 98.5% genetically identical with humans. But they live very, very different lives. They look the same when they're young, but when they grow up, the chimps live in an alpha male-driven, warring, violent world where they war with each other over territory and mates. And the bonobos, they are a matriarchal society, female-driven, and when they have issues, they have sex to work it out. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But why are they so different, right? Anybody know? Why are they so different? They're so identical. Well, it's because of habitat, okay? 2 million years ago, they separated from each other, and that was when the Congo River was formed. And neither of these species know how to swim, so a big river, you get separated. South of the river is where the lush land, the tropical, always available food is available. North of the river, you're more temperate, it's more seasonal, and you had to fight with gorillas over food. And so in the north, being strong made a lot of sense because then you can defend your space. And in the south, being cohesive and having stability in your harmony in your society makes more sense, so you have the female-led, right? And so it's really environment is what's changing us. It's not built into our genes to fight. It's actually the fact that we have grown from a few million to 8, 9 billion people over 10,000 years. That's really the issue that's happening, is that we've created an artificial scarcity, and that artificial scarcity has changed our mindset to think that we need to hoard. So what are the 3 movies I think we're headed into? The 2 that are very likely today in the path that we're going on is that we are already starting on this path of Elysium, of the have and have-nots, and having greater and greater disparity between the rich and the poor. And when that happens, that's not a stable equilibrium. That's going to create turmoil, conflict, which will lead to geopolitical conflict, which will lead to some kind of apocalyptic end. The one that we would want to get to is more of a Star Trek finish, right, where everybody has what they need. They work because they want to contribute to society, and they look forward to discovering outside of this planet and outside of the solar system. Okay. Now, what enabled the Star Trek universe to happen? Anybody Star Trek fans here? All right, got a hidden one that doesn't want to raise his hand. Do you know this scene here? Okay, this is, he's not that big of a fan. Sorry. This is the scene. This is a scene from First Contact. This is when did the humans get an opportunity to create an abundant world? Was when the aliens, the Vulcans came, and it was a rational, advanced species with new technology, gave it to humans, and brought abundance. Okay? In the movie, it was an alien that did it. We are creating our own rational, advanced species that will have new technologies in the form of AI that we get to control. And we get to control when it comes, and we get to control what it does for us. Right? We don't need to rely on the kindness of an alien. It's actually a privilege. Actually, there is one piece of bad news about Star Trek that most people don't realize, is that how did we even get here? In 2026, this year, in Star Trek lore, was when World War III started. And then it went for 200, it was a 30-year war that took then 200 to 300 years to recover from. And this was 300 years later when the Vulcans came and we've actually started to recover from killing each other. Okay? I'm hoping that part of the story doesn't come. Okay? But, so you guys are the generation that is going to see this transition happen. I'm hoping that we have a transition that avoids that, the apocalyptic part of Star Trek. And because you're in this time with these skills, with these resources, with these technology, you have a power that nobody else in any time in the past have had. And because of that, you actually have a responsibility that is greater than any other generation that has. Right? And you are going to be living the consequences of that change. So you need to take responsibility for what you will actually be inheriting. And then you need to demand a seat at the table. First, start with the dinner table. Okay? Talk to your parents. Talk to them about what are they doing about AI. Talk to them about how are they using it. What is their philosophy about it? What are they worried about? At your workplace, when you do internships or when you actually get into a real job, you're going to need to figure out how can they be more ethical in that technology use. At some point, you're going to get to vote. When you do, vote for candidates that do. And if you can, actually go work for them. Go run for office, because young people need to have a voice in government. My last story, it'll be very fast. The caterpillar story. You're going to say, what do I care about caterpillars? Because the caterpillar has one program. The program is eat as much as possible and then grow as fast as possible. And that's what we've been running as a society for the last 200 years. But the caterpillar has an advantage over us, is that it has a genetic program that says when it's enough, it stops, and it builds a cocoon, and its brain melts away from having that old program to a program that allows it to see a 3D world and be able to fly and be able to have its place in the ecosystem and contribute to society and have offsprings. This is what we need to do, is that we need to unlearn. We need to forget what has made us successful the last few hundred years, because we've gotten to the stage where that's the time to do it. Okay? So I will skip the last slide because I think we're out of time. But one quick quote, we're in heaven today. Okay? Now the question is, this stage that God has given us, what are we going to do? It's up to us. How this plays out is up to us. And Jim Lovell was an Apollo astronaut in 1968 that said that. So here's some my contact information if you want to get in touch with me or read some of my writings. And I think that's it. And